The surprising guest Johnny Carson couldn't stand. The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, was a staple of its time, revolutionizing the late-night talk show format. However, despite his historic success and impact on television culture, there's more to Johnny Carson than meets the eye. He wasn't perfect by any means. From embarrassing jokes to failed marriages and uncomfortable guest interactions, you might be surprised at what lurks beneath the surface. While many celebrities were happy to join him on stage for an interview or performance, others weren't so lucky, as some were suggested to mocking jabs from Carson himself. Unhappy husbandry. Although he was a celebrated television personality, Johnny Carson was not perfect. In fact, many say that Carson often mistreated those closest to him. You would think that someone who just got married would be content and in love, but for Carson, this wasn't the case. One of his most destructive episodes occurred when he humiliated his new wife during their honeymoon. In 1987, after Carson exchanged vows with his fourth wife, Alexis Moss, the newlyweds embarked on a romantic voyage to Italy. However, this blissful honeymoon was short-lived, as Carson rapidly became irritated and vented his frustration onto his bride. In an unpleasant incident in front of others, he warned her that if she made any similar remarks again, their marriage wouldn't last another 3 weeks. Another strained relationship. Johnny Carson only had 3 sons from his initial marriage and no further children with any of the other marriages. His son Rick suffered from a form of mental illness that was not commonly accepted or even well known at the time. Consequently, he ended up in an institution for long-term care, to which Johnny's former manager, Henry Bushkin, affirmed that Carson never visited him there once. Although his future was full of promise, Rick's story came to a tragic end. On June 21, 1991, he'd been admiring the view from Morro Bay when his car suddenly veered off course and plummeted 125 feet down an embankment, killing him instantly. Johnny paid tribute to Rick during one of his shows after this heartbreaking event happened and grieved deeply for Rick afterwards. However, it didn't make up for any lost time between them before them. Carson Unleashed. To commemorate his 25th year on NBC, Johnny Carson was honored with a luxurious celebration aboard the Queen Mary in October 1987. Unfortunately for him, Rick, who had been having issues with alcohol, also accompanied them to the event and acted out of character due to his struggles. Rick was highly inebriated, and when Johnny went to investigate him, they both became embroiled in a heated altercation. This took place on the ship that featured network executives, media representatives, as well as Carson's family members and acquaintances present. It's been reported that it was Carson who instigated this quarrel by losing his temper and shouting aggressive words at Johnny. To make matters worse, he even tried to throw a punch, but fortunately, someone intervened just before things got out of hand. Put down the bottle. As Johnny Carson's alcohol consumption rose, so did his negative qualities. He notoriously had a bad reputation among those who regularly interacted with him due to this issue, often being described as mean-spirited and unkind. In 1982, it was reported that he drove while under the influence of alcohol in his DeLorean, resulting in misdemeanor charges where he pleaded no contest and received 3 years probation alongside an attendance at an alcoholic program for drivers. His car was exclusively permitted for his commute to and from work, entirely void of passengers or animals. Carson spills all in 60 minutes. Carson was fully aware of his addiction and took steps to avoid the press so that he wouldn't need to confront his struggles. This realization led him to alter how he joked about addiction on his show. Back in 1977, in an interview with 60 Minutes, Carson shared his struggles regarding alcohol and the wonderful times he had experienced drinking alongside Ed McMahon. His candor about this topic was intriguing. However, many found his more cutting jokes to be off-putting. Johnny and Joanne, doomed from the start. One of the most talked about relationships Johnny Carson ever had was when he and Joanne Copeland wed in 1963. Before meeting him, she became a Pan-American World Airways stewardess. After first crossing paths with her future husband on their initial date in 1960, while he hosted game show Who Do You Trust?, sparks flew between them that would eventually lead to their marriage 3 years later. After 9 years of marriage, the Carsons decided to part ways in 1972. Though their union ended, there was no doubt that Mrs. Carson still dedicated her efforts towards ensuring her ex-husband's success and TV legacy remain intact. Unsurprising, then, that she devotedly stood by him post-divorce, a testament to genuine kindness and commitment. An affair to remember. In 2013, Henry Bushkin, Johnny Carson's former agent, exposed some startling details about him in his tell-all book. One of the explosive revelations was that Joanne Copeland, Johnny's second wife, had an affair with Frank Gifford. Henry insists that Johnny, instead of filing a divorce, brought him to the residence where they were living and made him look for any evidence of his wife's infidelity. When presented with this idea, Johnny allegedly burst into tears and was wearing a gun on his belt without providing an explanation why it was there. Jealous Johnny's dirty work. Initially, Henry Bushkin was hesitant to embark on his fact-finding mission, but ultimately decided to go and discover some salacious evidence. Unsurprisingly, this bolstered Johnny's belief in the affair. He then headed out with Ed McMahon for a night of imbibing at local bars. After the rumored affair 15 years prior, Frank Gifford wed Kathy Lee Gifford. She even had some fun with it during an episode of The Today Show by asking her husband if he was guilty. His response? "I can't remember, maybe?" Nevertheless, they tied the knot in 1986 and have been happily married ever since. Rare moment relaxing at home with first wife Jody. Johnny's union with Jody Morrill Walcott in 1948 was troubled right away. Plagued by major differences and unfaithfulness on both sides, unfortunately the couple ended their marriage in 1963 when Johnny took Joanne Copeland as his bride. Sadly, Jody passed away at 83 years old in 2015. In 1956, a photo was snapped of Johnny and Jody that afforded us an exclusive glimpse into their home life, lounging by the pool together. No hope for Johnny. Over the years, Bob Hope's hearing and vision weakened to a point where his guest appearances on Carson's show became increasingly difficult. His inability to pick up on Carson's questions often taxed his patience beyond measure. Carson had to firmly stick with the script that his staff provided him. If he asked a question out of order, Hope would give an alternate response. Despite this annoyance and frustration, Hope kept appearing on Carson's show, showcasing his flaws for the TV audience across America. One of the writers remembers how enraged Carson was after one particular episode with Hope. "If I ever end up like that," he said to them sternly, "I want you guys to shoot me." Carson gets around. It's true for many celebrities. Carson was a very promiscuous man. During the height of his contentious divorce with Joanne, he unabatedly entertained himself in the company of Playboy model Angel Tompkins, heedless to any warnings that if this knowledge were to become public via his wife's lawyer, he'd be putting any settlement at risk. During his third marriage to Joanna, she was fully aware of his extramarital affairs. As a way of atonement for these indiscretions, he would lavish her with lavish gifts, including luxury apartments and cars, as well as diamonds. This undoubtedly put a strain on the relationship, one that could not be repaired by material items. A mother of a problem. Johnny Carson's personal life was filled with more than a few issues. From romantic relationships to familial struggles, he attributed all of his inner turmoil and lack of warmth to one single source: his loveless mother, Ruth. Every day he faced pain caused by her emotional detachment. Reflecting on his mother, Carson proclaimed her the toughest of them all. He also ascribed to her responsibility for the breakdowns in his marriages, claiming that there was no goddamn way she could ever be pleased and likening her to Lady Macbeth as he cursed about being psychologically damaged by her presence. Upon news of death came a careless farewell from him. The Wicked Witch is dead, and Carson made no appearance at subsequent funeral services. An insensitive jokester. Fat jokes have become a common occurrence, and it's difficult to pinpoint when or who started them. Johnny Carson was no exception. He made light of people's body size on national television in front of millions each night. Just imagine how you would feel if you were the butt of one of these jokes, an experience that many endured. Raymond Burr, the veteran NBC actor and frequent target of Carson's fat jokes, eventually reached his limit and refused to appear on The Tonight Show. Despite this decision, he made an exception for two occasions, in 1968 and 1976. Losing the deal. In 1980, Johnny Carson made the conscious choice to forego buying the Aladdin Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. While this was solely a personal and financial decision of his own volition, he became perturbed when media outlets inaccurately portrayed him as if he had lost out on the deal. Ultimately, another group led by Wayne Newton emerged victorious in acquiring the property. Taken aback, Carson retaliated with comedic jabs at Newton on his show. After all the hard work that had gone into constructing an aura of masculinity around himself, this inevitably provoked a bitter feud between Carson and Newton, which quickly gained attention from fans worldwide. War of Words. Over the years, Wayne Newton shared his grievances against late-night host Johnny Carson on Larry King Live. His words expressed a deep pain. Johnny Carson is a mean-spirited individual who has wounded people without them even being aware of it. For some perplexing reason, he determined that I should experience such unfavorable energy. It was evident from his statement that Mr. Newton had become exhausted with all the animosity directed at him by Carson himself. In a fit of emotion, Newton stormed into Carson's office and declared he'd fight if the mockery persisted. His colleague took him seriously and stopped making jokes at once, leaving an elated Newton behind as he walked away. Carson saw no value in archiving old episodes. Sadly, most of the early Johnny Carson Tonight Show episodes have been lost to time. Out of the shows he hosted between 1962 and 1972, only 33 remain, a tragic outcome caused by networks habitually wiping their tapes to reuse them for other programs. This was once standard practice in the industry, but ultimately resulted in many beloved classics being wiped away. Surprisingly, Carson was unconcerned by the network system. He suggested that they transform old episodes into guitar picks since he felt they had no value. Some guests kept tapes for themselves, but sometimes these have emerged again in recent years. Thankfully, most episodes from 1973 to 1992 are still accessible and intact today. Snide comments about Snyder. Carson despised Tom Snyder, the person who succeeded him as host of NBC's Tomorrow Show. He believed that Snyder was talentless and dull. Owing to his newfound popularity from hosting the Tomorrow Show, he was subsequently given a new program, the aptly named The Late Late Show with Tom Snyder. During a night out at the widely acclaimed Chasen's in LA, Carson's rage and fury were unleashed as he viciously ranted about his contempt for Snyder. Needless to say, an alcohol-induced outburst of this nature is far from professional. The worst guest. As a late-night talk show host, Carson welcomed many esteemed guests onto his program. However, he certainly had his favored few and his least beloved ones too. We can all take a guess as to which celebrity held the dubious title of worst on Carson's show. From his perspective, it was none other than Bob Hope. Bob Hope, another famous American television star, was born with a script in his hand. Carson criticized the fact that Hope rarely ever held an honest conversation due to his reliance on writers for all topics of discussion. Andrew Nichols, one of Johnny's former co-head writers, stated, "There was nothing natural about Bob. He needed help from his scribes for every topic imaginable. In comparison, Johnny was equipped with great wit and knowledge, such as Swahili, Russian, and astronomy. He admired those who seemed actively involved with reality. There was simply no meaningful dialogue possible between them because of this huge disparity."